world. Well, joining us for more on that from Washington is Matthew RJ Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy and a political strategist. Well, let's just talk about how much of a change do you anticipate, Matt, in U.S. policy towards Israel? Let's start, for example, on the issue of what we call peace and security issues, settlements, relations with the Palestinians and the peace process.
I think much of that is what we will be seeing in the next few weeks. Clearly, there was something going on with the Twitter handle game with the U.S. Embassy in Israel. But I think the devil will be in the details. It was nice to note from Tony Blinken's testimony yesterday, the new soon-to-be Secretary of State, that he doesn't really see room for really making Israeli-Palestinian peace a major issue, which would be wise, because the one thing, among others, that the Trump administration's approach really helped do was de-link Palestinian-Israeli relations from American foreign policy and the veto that it had over Israel's relations with the rest of the Arab world. That would be important to continue, but I think we're going to see how they engage with Iran is going to really be the major issue, because you can really put Palestinian-Israeli peace issues on the back burner. But if we're going headlong into the nuclear agreement to revive the JCPOA, then that's pretty much as bad for Israel and its new Arab friends, publicly Arab friends, than it is for the U.S.
All right. Well, let's bring into the conversation now from Washington also Halie Soifer, Executive Director of the Jewish Democratic Council for America. Let's put Iran off on the side for a minute. And I just want you to address whether Matthew's point, do you think a Biden administration, at least in the near future, is going to put the Israeli-Palestinian issue on the back burner?
I don't believe that it'll be on the back burner, but I think it's important for us to start by saying that today was a monumental day in U.S. history. With Joe Biden's swearing in and Donald Trump's departure, we now have a president who will move forward with policies that is aligned with the values of Jewish Americans. He mentioned in his inauguration speech, and it was the first time a president has ever mentioned in their inauguration speech, his commitment to fighting hatred and extremism and white supremacy, which we have seen emboldened by our former president for the past 4 years. He's also today implementing actions and not just words that are directly aligned with the priorities of Jewish Americans, including repealing the Muslim ban, restoring protections for DACA recipients, rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. And his policy agenda is squarely aligned with Jewish Americans, and it will include strong support of Israel, as his nominee to be Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, affirmed yesterday before the Senate. So Jewish Americans are celebrating today's historic and monumental inauguration because we need to now move forward as a country and unite behind Joe Biden.
Right. Well, Halie, since both you and Matthew did mention that testimony given yesterday in Congress by Secretary of State designate Tony Blinken, let's hear a little of what he had to say about the Iran nuclear agreement.
President-elect Biden is committed to the proposition that Iran will not acquire a nuclear weapon. The breakout time, the time it would take Iran to produce enough fissile material for one weapon, has gone from beyond a year, as it was under the JCPOA, to about 3 or 4 months, based at least on public reporting. The president-elect believes that if Iran comes back into compliance, we would too, but we would use that as a platform with our allies and partners who would once again be on the same side with us to seek a longer and stronger agreement.
Matthew, I do want to give you, if you feel you have to respond to something Halie said previously, to feel free to do so. But relating to Anthony Blinken's comment there, if you feel that's a viable strategy, re-entering the Iran nuclear agreement and using that as leverage to perhaps try to gain some more concessions from the Iranians.
Look, with Biden's policy, the fact is the nuclear agreement from 2015 was an extremely flawed framework. Okay, to revive it is to revive a bad deal that doesn't work, that allowed Iran to continue cheating as it has, because it was never in compliance with the deal. So anything that involves consulting our allies, it's good. Look, that there are Abraham Accords so that we have Israel and we have the United Arab Emirates and other countries that are visibly friends. And it can't be like the Obama administration, where these negotiations happened in secret, which was pretty much a way of stabbing Israel and our traditional allies in the back. So they're going to have to be consulted. But if the end result, again, is to just tinker around the edges of a flawed deal, which allows the Iranian regime to continue enriching uranium on its own soil, that's problematic. More so, we should look at how easy it has been for Iran to cheat right now, to get over 20% enrichment level, to realize just how little this deal did in terms of even addressing the one area it was supposed to address, which is, of course, its nuclear program, not its humanitarian rights, ballistic missiles, terrorism record.
All right. Well, Halie, I want to give you a chance to respond to Matt's point, his concern that it's just going to be a renewed Iran nuclear deal with some, as he put it, tinkering around the edges.
Well, I strongly disagree with almost everything that Matt said. But I'd like to start by saying this isn't 2015. We don't have to speak in hypotheticals. We now know what the world looks like with a JCPOA in place and without. When Donald Trump became president, the JCPOA was in place. We had monitoring in order to ensure Iran's compliance. It was complying at the time. And in fact, Iran was at least a year from developing the ability to have a nuclear weapon. And that remains the shared top priority of the United States and Israel, to ensure Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. Now, 2.5 years later, after Donald Trump recklessly walked away from the deal with nothing to replace it, and Iran is now out of compliance, as Tony Blinken said yesterday, they are 2 to 3 months from having a nuclear weapon. And we, the United States, have been isolated in our ability to both reinstate an arms embargo, but also take other measures to contain Iran's nuclear development. A return to the JCPOA only once Iran complies is likely the best way to ensure that we can ensure that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. But as Tony Blinken said, that's not just going back into the deal. That is strengthening and lengthening an agreement that, frankly, is now past. We are no longer in that agreement. We don't have that agreement any longer. But working with our allies to go back to an agreement once Iran complies with the original deal is in our interest, and it's in Israel's interest. It is in line with our national security.
Matt, just in about 30 seconds, I can give you a time for a last response to some of Halie's points.
Well, I think she lives in a parallel universe. Look, the nuclear deal was never about the nuclear program for Iran. It was about America's strategic realignment. If we're going to, say that it's not 2015 today, then it's a small wonder we have about 80% of the same folks who made this horrible deal in 2015, now just with different titles inside the Biden administration. And the fact that Rob Malley is being considered apparently by the Biden administration as the special envoy to Iran should scare everyone. He wrote an article just a little while ago in Foreign Affairs magazine outlining the same strategic realignment.
We're going to have
for Israel, for the U.S.
We're going to have to leave it at that. Matthew RJ Brodsky and Halie Soifer, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.